Okay, just imagine going 18 days without food. Now imagine using the immense physical toll of that experience, not to beg for sympathy, but as the actual launch pad for a massive democratic movement. Today, in this explainer, we're breaking down a highly impactful address by climate activist and education reformer Sonam Wangchuk. Delivered on the 18th day of his climate fast, this isn't just a simple health update. What we're actually looking at is a fascinating strategic pivot. We're going to explore exactly how a solitary, deeply personal protest is attempting to transform into a nationwide demand for direct democracy.
To really grasp the gravity of the situation, we have to look at the extreme pressure Wangchuk was under exactly 18 days into his protest. I mean, he was receiving thousands of messages from panicked supporters literally begging him to break his fast. And at the exact same time, he's facing mounting external pressure from authorities. He was even hearing about potential court appeals designed to legally intervene and force-feed him. So, you have a man totally cornered. He's caught between his own failing physical body and a legal system threatening to strip away his agency. He uses this specific video address to thread an incredibly tight needle, giving us a highly anticipated update on both his health and his unyielding political resolve. When it comes to his health, though, his approach is jarringly blunt. He specifically says he isn't going to die in the next couple of days. He acknowledges that medical tests, regular blood pressure tracks and ECGs, they definitely show significant physical weakness. But crucially, his vital organs aren't in immediate life-threatening danger. The psychology here is honestly brilliant. He is actively de-escalating all that public panic surrounding his survival so he can keep a laser focus on the actual cause. He uses this sort of medical clearance to cement his resolve, making it crystal clear to everyone listening that the fast goes on. So naturally, the immediate question flooding in from well-wishers was, why refuse to eat when literally everyone is asking you to? Well, Wangchuk treats this moment as a masterclass in political game theory. He argues that simply giving up and eating would send a really dangerous counterproductive message to the government. In protest politics, your leverage is everything, right? Breaking the fast without securing any real concessions just signals to those in power that citizens will eventually tire out and back down on their own. It says systemic accountability is totally unnecessary. For him, giving up that leverage is just total surrender, which would make the previous 18 days of suffering completely meaningless.
To justify taking this continued risk, Wangchuk draws a truly chilling contrast. He asks his audience to directly weigh the value of his one single life against a much larger ongoing tragedy. He points to the recent devastating suicides of 20 innocent students who are all driven to despair by the crushing pressures of the current administrative and educational system. And the gravity of this only deepens when he warns that if things don't fundamentally change, we could be looking at 80 more of these tragedies in the coming years. Just let that tragic weight sink in for a second. He's forcefully reframing the public's intense concern, completely pivoting it away from his personal well-being and pointing it directly at this monumental crisis.
I mean, how often do we see leaders actively put a systemic failure above their own basic personal survival? By making that stark comparison, Wangchuk emphasizes that his personal health is entirely secondary. The core of his message here is that these student suicides represent a profound rot within the systemic framework. He's essentially turning himself into a human spotlight. The fast isn't about him at all. It's a meticulously designed mechanism to force the nation to look at this failure and to recognize the urgent, absolutely non-negotiable need to protect future generations from a deeply flawed system.
But look, Wangchuk is a strategist, and he knows he can't be completely inflexible. He acknowledges the deep concerns of visiting elders and political leaders who came to him out of profound love and honestly genuine anger over his declining health. So respecting their emotional plea, he proposes what he calls a middle path. And this is where we see a really brilliant strategic pivot. This isn't just some compromise between starving and surrendering. He takes all that massive panicked energy surrounding his health and he weaponizes it into organized civic action, scheduling a massive mobilization for July 20th. He completely shifts the heavy lifting from his individual fast over to the collective public.
Instead of passive worry, he demands direct democracy. He introduces his vision for July 20th as a pure exercise in democratic participation. He's urging the public to physically step into the process rather than just watching from the sidelines and hoping somebody else fixes things. Now, why does this matter to us? Because it's a powerful reminder that democracy isn't a spectator sport. He defines direct democracy as citizens physically taking to the streets to demand change. It functions as an active, living, breathing counterpart to the traditional closed-door rule of lawmakers.
He actually illustrates this political philosophy with a really vivid comparison between the parliament and the street. He rightly acknowledges parliament as the paramount temple of democracy, where our rules and policies are ultimately forged. But he describes the street as its poor cousin, a public space that, when overflowing with citizens, can actually wield way more power than parliament itself. It's a profound insight into the balance of civic power. It reminds us that institutional buildings only hold authority because the people out on the street collectively agree to give it to them.
And to actually make the street bigger than Parliament, he doesn't just ask for a vague crowd. He sets a specific, monumental target of 50,000 citizens to march on July 20th. We really need to pause and contextualize that number. Mobilizing 50,000 people to physically show up and march, that is a logistical nightmare, and it's an absolute, undeniable display of grassroots power. He envisions this massive wave of citizens joining hands with members of parliament to ensure the demand for educational reform can't just be swept under the rug. He knows that raw numbers are the only currency that guarantees an issue won't just fade away into the next news cycle.
Now here is where Wangchuk introduces a brilliant, almost ironic twist. He explicitly calls on schools, colleges, and universities to participate. He's effectively telling students to skip school to protest, but he frames it as experiential education. It turns out, under the guidelines of the New Education Policy, or NEP, marching in the streets is arguably a top-tier, highly practical lesson in political science. It's an incredibly clever loophole that lets students learn exactly how democracy works firsthand, transforming a standard political protest into a massive state-sanctioned field trip.
Of course, grand visions require ground-level logistics. Wangchuk is basically telling his audience to stop asking him to eat and start doing the actual work. He lays out the modern anatomy of a grassroots protest right there. First, give a missed call to a specific number. In India, a missed call is a highly effective, incredibly low-barrier tool for trackable mobilization. Second, formally register on their website. And third, physically show up on July 20th. He's taking all that amorphous, passive concern for his health and channeling it into a rigid, highly organized, and measurable funnel of civic action.
Then, in the final moments of his address, he makes a hard pivot from logistics into a deeply strategic, really emotional appeal. He speaks directly to mothers, invoking the universal truth that a mother's love for her children is completely unmatched. Yes, he is tapping into the profound, deeply rooted anxieties families have about the safety of their kids in the current system. But if we look just a bit deeper, we see that strategically, bringing mothers to the forefront fundamentally changes the entire optical landscape of the protest.
Seriously, think about the political genius of this move. A march led entirely by angry young men? That can be effortlessly dismissed by authorities as a mob or just a disruption to public order. But a march vanguard led by mothers, fiercely fighting for their children's futures and standing up against grueling exam systems? That is politically untouchable. By explicitly asking mothers to physically lead the crowd to parliament, Wangchuk ensures the demonstration projects the most authentic, unimpeachable voice possible. It showcases the very real, human stakes of educational policy to every single lawmaker watching.
Bringing his address to a close, Wangchuk sets a definitive, totally non-negotiable condition for his own survival. He states he will only sleep peacefully and finally break his fast if the July 20th march is a massive success and the issue reaches the right hands. Notice the incredible transfer of responsibility here. He has essentially taken his own life as collateral and handed the keys directly to his supporters. If they successfully mobilize and do the work, he eats. If they fail, he doesn't. The dramatic stakes literally could not be higher.
He's essentially shifted the burden of his survival from his own hospital bed out into the chaotic streets of the nation. And it forces us, as observers of modern political movements, to face a really critical question. In today's highly polarized world, is a massive, organized display of direct democracy actually enough to force the hands of those in power and demand systemic accountability? And ultimately, will it be enough to save his life? This is an absolute masterclass in the mechanics of protest, and an ongoing story that demands our absolute attention. Thanks for joining this explainer. Let us know what you think.